Hello, welcome. In this lecture, we're going to talk about another important traveler, and that is Ibn Battuta. In the previous lecture, we looked into the traveling accounts and the important book that was Kitab ul Hind, which was by the important first traveler that we have already discussed. This is Al-Beruni. So, similarly, in this lecture, we're going to talk about Ibn Battuta. Now, Ibn Battuta, what what did he come to India for? What were his important works? What were his important contributions? What did he write about? We'll be looking into the all aspects like we discussed for El Baruni, similarly for Ibn Battuta. So let's get started. The first thing that you have on your screens is telling us about an early globe trotter. An early globe trotter basically explains about how adventurous he was when it came to traveling. So Ibn Battuta's book of travels was called Rihala. Sorry, Rihla. Rihla, right? This was the book of travels. So in this particular Rihilas, he has discussed very many countries that he has traveled, and one amongst them is India. Is this clear? So Rihla. Rihla is extremely important. You need to remember this for the exams point of view. Now, this text Rihla is written in what language? It is written in Arabic language. Okay. It provides extremely rich content and interesting details about the places, like I told you, that he traveled. So it is dealing with both social and cultural life in the subcontinent around what time? The time period is the 14th century. All right, the time period is the 14th century. You see, these bits are extremely important. The language, the language in which the text is written, then what time period are we talking about? So all of this is important. Now, where was Ibn Battuta from? Ibn Battuta was from Morocco. So he was a Moroccan traveler, right? And he was born in Tangier, into one of the most educated families of the place. So of course we understand that he came from a wealthy background. And when I mean wealthy not in just terms of economic wealth, but also social wealth, right? So he came from a wealthy background, as a result of which he was highly taught. So he was a learned man, and he was given education. How? That he was basically, he received literary education, and let me write it here: literary education and scholastic education when he was very young. All right. And also his expertise was what is in Islamic religious law, which is also known as the Sharia law, right? So these bits are extremely important. Now, unlike most of the others, basically the other travelers that we discussed, let's for instance take Al-Beruni only because we've already studied him. All right. How did Al-Beruni basically land up in India? He landed up because of the political reasons, right? That Muhammad of Ghazni basically invaded India, and as a result of which Al-Beruni came to India. Now, this was his political reason. Was there a similar political reason for, let's say, Ibn Battuta? No. Ibn Battuta was a traveler. All right, he was a traveler. So he was a traveler, and the places that he traveled are given in this diagram before you. So you see these areas that are marked. This is from one of his, this is from his Rihla only. He's telling us about the places that he has visited. So there is Kabul, there is Ghazna, there is Kandahar, there is in this here, then this is Lahari. Now you see, these terms, or these names rather, that have been used in this picture are not how we understand these places today. Why? Because these are the names that has been, in the text of Ibn Battuta, that is, which are in the books of travel, Rihlas, that he has described. Okay, so don't get confused. What you need to remember is this is a picture which is telling us about how, you know how big a traveler he was and how he traveled to all these places. Now, if you look, Hansi is in Haryana. All right. Now, Multan is in Pakistan. Then, this place is actually today what we understand as Karachi. Is this clear? And you see, the diagrams are extremely important. You must be absolutely familiar with the places that are mentioned and also the rivers here. So, this river, this first river that is coming, this is Indus, right? This river is, as it is mentioned here, Satluj. And this river here is Chenab. So the names of the rivers are extremely important. And from this, you also understand that, when you see he's starting from Morocco, okay, so Morocco is the west of all of these places, right? So he's extensively traveling to all these places, and we'll talk about how extensively, sorry, he traveled in a detailed manner. But I hope this picture is helping you understand that he was an early globe trotter, all right, early globe trotter, as in the sense that he extensively traveled. Now, unlike unlike the other members of his class, Ibn Battuta considered extreme amount of experience. He got extreme, or rather, he gained extreme experience. Why? Because of his travels, right? He absolutely loved traveling. So, if you have to remember these points from the exam's purpose, that he loved traveling. All right. And he went off to far off places just to do what? Just to explore them, just to know about them. So there was an inquisitiveness present about the ways other people live their lives, about the cultures, about different religions, about the ways of living, the mannerisms, all of those things that we have discussed in the previous lecture. So these were some of his reasons to travel, right? Now, when did he come to India? He came to India in 1332 and 33. So this is the time period when he came to India. All right. Now, India during this period, if you understand, this is what? This is, like I told you, the 14th century. So India during the 14th century was under the Delhi Sultanate. So we'll be reading about that bit too, but let's just get familiar with the basic introduction to Ibn Battuta. All right. Now, I told you he was quite an explorer. He loved traveling. What are the places? What are the different places that he traveled to? So let me just write them on the map here so that you can, understand the extensive travel that he did. So he traveled extensively in Syria, Iraq, Persia, Yemen, Oman, and a few trading ports in the coast of East Africa. So this is all about the West. In the West, he traveled to all these places, and you will see in the lecture itself that he visited India and he also moved what? East. So we'll be discussing how he moved to China and all the other places as well, also Maldives. So these are the important places that you need to remember about his extensive travel. Now, he traveled through the Central Asia. What do I mean by Central Asia? I mean the countries like today we understand as Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, then Turkmenistan, okay? All of these places he extensively traveled. So Afghanistan is here and Pakistan is here, and then there is India. If you look at the map, you'll understand this. And he has heard he heard about when he was traveling in Central Asia. Okay, let me explain this in a different way. You see, I told you that he entered India in the year 1332 and 33. But what was the reason behind this? Why did he choose to do so? He chose to do so because when he was traveling in Central Asia, he heard about who? About the Sultan of India. About the Sultan of India. And who is the Sultan of India? Let's know about him. So the Sultan of India that I told you that India during the 14th century was under the Delhi Sultanate. So the Sultan of India at that period of time was Muhammad bin Tughlaq. All right, we were under the Tughlaq dynasty. Tughlaq dynasty, right? So he heard about Muhammad bin Tughlaq, that he was extremely generous in nature to the people who visited from the foreign lands. He heard that he had quite a reputation, that he enjoyed the foreign goods, and he was generous to artists, generous to artists and travelers. So, how was he generous to artists and travelers? This point can also come in other words, that he patronized a number of artists, a number of poets, a number of painters, all of those things. So he patronized a number of them. Patronize is simply in the sense that he actually paid money to the artist. He basically appreciated the talent, and he uh, also paid them off really well. So these are the few important points which actually motivated Ibn Battuta to come to India. Right now, when he came to India, all right, let's first discuss a little bit about Muhammad bin Tughlaq, because since we're talking about that, this is a time period when he came into India, we must know a little bit about him. So, Muhammad bin Tughlaq is 1325 till 1351, right? So the time period is extremely important. Now, Tughlaq dynasty was not basically founded by him. It was founded by Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. All right. Muhammad bin Tughlaq came in next. All right. Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So MBT is Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He was a very attractive character in the history of medieval, India, owing to his schemes, ambitious plans, and novel experiments. Now, by some historians, this person, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, is also regarded as somebody who was way ahead of his times. Right? Now, Muhammad bin Tughlaq developed good relations with the different rulers around the world, for instance, with Egypt, with China, and with Iran. China here is especially important. Why? Because there's a relation when it comes to China. Ibn Battuta and Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So remember this point about China, we'll discuss this later. Now, all his ambitious schemes and novel experiments that he, indulged in, thinking for, better administration, all of those points, they basically failed, right? So contemporary writers of his time, for instance, Barani was one of them, Ibn Battuta, all of these were unable to give a correct picture about the personality of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. But Muhammad bin Tughlaq was the only Delhi Sultan who had received a comprehensive literary, literary, religious, and philosophical education. So he was a learned man. He's the rather only Delhi Sultan who was, who received basically education, and as a result of which you can now better understand this patronized point, right? So this is the bit about Muhammad bin Tughlaq. I'm not going to go into the details of it. This amount of information is going to help you understand the nature of the Muhammad bin Tughlaq, why he patronized a number of artists, and what made Ibn Battuta come to India. So these all points basically made him come to India. Now, when he came to India, the Sultan was extremely impressed by him. Who is the Sultan here? The Sultan is Muhammad bin Tughlaq, right? Sultan was immensely impressed by him, immensely impressed by his stories that he has traveled around the world. He's visited all these places, the ones that we just enumerated. As a result of which, the Sultan was so impressed that he provided him the position of a Qazi. Now, what exactly is a Qazi? A Qazi is basically a judge. Okay, so he was appointed a Qazi of Delhi. Right? When he was appointed the Qazi of Delhi, this of course made him stay in India for a significant period of time. Now, he remained in this position for several years until the relationship between Muhammad bin Tughlaq and Ibn Battuta got sour over some, issue. When it got sour, he was also actually imprisoned, but that didn't last long. The issues were basically resolved between the two, and then what happened? Then he was resorted to imperial service, right? And under this imperial service, he was asked to, he was ordered, not asked. The Sultan would order, right? He was ordered that he would go to China as Sultan's envoy for what? For the uh, Sultan's envoy to China as a basically representative of the Sultan. And who are we talking about here? China was basically back then under the Mongol ruler, right? China was under the Mongol ruler. So this bit is extremely important. So with this new assignment, Ibn Battuta basically took this up and he went to China. How did he go to China? He basically first went to the Malabar coast. From then he went to Maldives. He stayed in Maldives for a significant period of time, and he, what was the position of him in Maldives? He was also a qazi there. He was also a judge there, right? And then after that, he basically went to China. What part of China did he go to? Let's discuss that. Okay, so he went to, just a minute. Yeah. So he went to the, you know, port town, which is Zaitun, which we today understand as Huanzhou. So he extensively traveled in China, but he did not stay there. So he went as far as Beijing, but not beyond that. And he, after some period of time, returned. All right. So this is all about the places he traveled, the positions he occupied, what were his relations with the Muhammad bin Tughlaq, all of these things. Right. Now, after his stay in China, what places did he go to? He went to Venice, and then he returned to his home place, that is Morocco, where he actually found out that his mother had died due to plague a few months ago. So this is his basic story about Ibn Battuta. Right now, Ibn Battuta was, really famous. Rather, the reason why we're still studying him today is because he has meticulously, portrayed the great observations about the different societies, about the different cultures, about the different ways of living. Right. So he gave insights. His rihlas gave insights into, let's say, the different new cultures, new people, new beliefs, new values, new religions, etc. So we have to bear in mind that whenever we are going to talk about Ibn Battuta, we are simply going to understand him as a globe trotter. This is very important. Okay. Now, according to Ibn Battuta, he is also explained in his Rihlas, that is books of travel, telling us about the geographies of different places, the duration that was taken from the duration of traveling that was taken from traveling from one place to another. All of these things these things are discussed in the text. Let me give you an example for the same. For instance, he said that the distance from Daulatabad to Delhi was covered in 40 days. Now, what exactly is Daulatabad? It was an important town in Maharashtra. All right. Then he also said in his text that the distance from Gwalior is in Madhya Pradesh, Gwalior to Delhi took 10 days. So you can understand that he has meticulously pointed each and every point out in his texts, that is Rihila's books of travels. So he was, he was his texts were considered of great importance back then and also even today by the historians around. Now, what was the influence of all of this? The influence of all of this, that there was the number of people who took on the same step of Ibn Battuta. So, footsteps of Ibn Battuta. Let's understand this. Among the best known of these writers were Abdul Razak Samarkandi, who visited South India in 1440s. So, first person that we have studied about is Abdul Razak Samarkandi, right? These names are important, so do remember them. Then Mahmud, and where also did he visit? It was the south of India. So even that is important, right? Then the second point is Mahmud Wali Balkhi, who traveled very widely in the 1620s, and Sheikh Ali Hazin, who came to North India in the 1740s. Some of these authors were fascinated by India, and one of them was Mahmud Balkhi, even became a sort of a sannyasi for some time. So Mahmud Balki was so impressed by this culture of India that he even became a sannyasi. Now you understand, this is basically what? This is mixing up of cultures happening. Mahmud Balki was, you know, he changed, rather he did not change, but he ventured into understanding a new religion, as a result of which he actually became a sannyasi for some time period, right? Then others such as Hazin were disappointed and even disgusted with India, where they expected to receive red carpet treatment. Most of them saw India as a land of wonders. So what is this text basically telling us? This text basically telling us that Ibn Battuta basically influenced a number of travelers, right? They are the names given in this picture. You can take a screenshot of it or write these names down. These all people were basically, fascinated by the travel of Ibn Battuta. These people were fascinated by, let's say, the enjoyments of the curiosities. So, in order to cater to those curiosities about what the new place would be like, what their culture would be like, how the people would be like, so all of these things were taken into consideration, and a number of travelers got onto the same path of Ibn Battuta. So these all were basically influenced by who? Influenced by Ibn Battuta. Is this bit clear? Now let's get to the next. The next thing that we have to understand is the excitement of the unfamiliar. Now, Ibn Battuta has extensively written in his works that there were two things that caught his fancy, all right, that caught his fancy in the sense that he had absolute excitement in understanding about these products. He was not familiar with them before, and he was so mesmerized by these products that he actually wrote them down in his text. What are these two things? And it is the coconut and the betel leaf, or the pan, right? Very important two things. What does he have to say about it? Let's understand. So if you read this, nuts like a man's head. The following is how Ibn Battuta described the coconut. The trees are among the most peculiar trees in kind and most astonishing at a surprising in habit. They look exactly like date palms without any difference between them, except the one produces nuts as its fruits and the other produces dates. The nut of the coconut resembles a man's head, for in it are what look like two eyes and a mouth. If you've ever seen a coconut is pretty much like this. It has two holes in it like this, and there's a third one like this. So this is exactly what he's describing here. And the insides of it, when it is green, looks like the brain. And attached to it is a fiber which looks like hair. So you see around it, there are actually fibers also, which he's describing as the hair. And you see, he's here saying that it exactly looks like the head of a man. They make from these cords with which they sew up ships instead of using iron nails, and they also make from it cables for vessels. So you see here he is explaining to the readers that how there is this product in India which is coconut, which was extremely new to him. So not only is he describing how it looked like and what was it all about, he's also telling us about the uses of it. If you read these last lines, these are telling us about the way coconut was actually used. So this becomes extremely important, that uh, the cords were used to sew up ships instead of using iron nails. This is extremely important, right? And sorry, they also made cables for vessels. This is how different ways coconut was actually used by the people of India. So this caught his fancy. He's written about it in his own text, that is the Rihilas. Now the second is the pan. This is his description of the pan. The betel is a tree which is cultivated in the same manner as the grapevine. The betel has no fruit and it is grown only for the sake of its leaves. The manner of its use is that before eating it, one takes akia nuts. This is like a nutmeg, but it is broken up until it is reduced to small pellets, and one places these in his mouth and chews them. Then he takes the leaves of beetle, puts a little chalk on them, and masticates them along with the beetle. So here he's actually explaining the entire description of how it is done. So you can simply understand that he was actually quite fascinated by coconut and beetle or pan. Okay, so these are important things that you need to remember. Now, you see, why does one actually travel? One basically travels because there's an excitement of knowing the unfamiliar. If you and I are sitting here in, let's say, any part of India today, we'll be really excited to think about what, for instance, USA would be like. All right, but today it's quite easy for us. We can get a passport, get on a plane, and reach USA. But we're talking about the 14th century, so you can understand that there was a huge amount of excitement pertaining to the unfamiliar, how things would be like. So this excitement is best understood via how he explains the coconut and the beetle pan. And if other fruits also I'll discuss with you, he was extremely mesmerized by the mangoes also, and he was extremely mesmerized by the jackfruit. He was so mesmerized by the jackfruit so much that he said this is one of the best things that he has actually tasted in India. So these examples are extremely important. Do remember them from the exams point of view. Now, this is about the Indian cities now. Ibn Battuta has extensively written about the Indian cities. The two most important amongst them are Delhi and the other one is Daulatabad. So if you read this picture, this is actually explaining us about how he has described the entire place, Delhi. So he says the city of Delhi covers a wide area and has a large population. The ramparts around the Delhi is without parallel. Sorry, the rampart. Okay, let me tell you what a rampart is. Rampart is basically a boundary wall which is around a fort. So this would be the rampart, right? The breadth of its wall is 11 cubits, and inside it are houses for night sentry and gatekeepers. Inside the ramparts, there are storehouses for storing edibles, magazines, ammunition, and machines. These grains that are stored in these ramparts can last for a long period of time without rotting. In the interior of the rampart, horsemen as well as infantrymen move from one end to the other in the city. The rampart is pierced through by windows which open on the side of the city, and it is through these windows the light enters inside. The lower part of the rampart is built of stone and the upper part is of bricks. You see, these things that I'm underlining are extremely important. You have to remember them. What were used in the buildings back then, it was through this we understand it was both stone and bricks. It has many towers close to one another. There are 28 gates of the city which are called darwaza, and of these, the Badaun Darwaza is the greatest. Inside the Mandvi Darwaza, there is a grain market. Adjacent to the Gur Darwaza, there is an orchard. The city of Delhi has fine cemetery in which graves have domes over them, and those who do not have domes over them do have an arch. In the cemetery, they serve flowers such as tuberose, jasmine, wild rose, etc., and flowers blossom there in all seasons. So if you see, with with such details, he has actually explained uh, you know the entire city of Delhi. Similarly, he does the same for Daulatabad. Now, Ibn Battuta find that cities in the subcontinent were full of exciting opportunities, right? So those who had the drive, those who had the energy, those who had the skills and the resources, they would reach the cities from the villages. And cities were basically full of life. All right. Now, he says the city life was, used to be smooth. It used to be, with usual hustle and bustle around. And this hustle and bustle would only get, disturbed when there was, an invasion or there was a war going on. Otherwise, things ran smooth. Okay. Now, the streets were full of crowds. Okay. The markets were full. And you have to also understand that he has described Delhi as a town, or rather as a city with a huge amount of population. So he says large population, and similarly he discusses this for Daulatabad, which I told you is in Maharashtra. Okay, so he says Daulatabad, that is in Maharashtra, was no less and easily that like Delhi's size. So discussing Delhi is extremely important. Why? Because Delhi has been an important place in history, continues to be. It is the capital of our country. So this is his, explanation about Delhi. Now, this is all about his excitement regarding the unfamiliar. So we have discussed about two important things: coconut and beetle, that is pan patta. Then we have discussed about what he had to say about Indian cities. Now, in a similar fashion, you have to understand that he has also discussed the bazaars. Bazaars are the markets. Okay, these are the markets. Now he has, written in his text that these bazaars were not the only place where economic activity used to happen. So, excluding the economic activity, these places were also a hub for social and cultural activities. He says that most bazaars have temples, most bazaars have mosques in them, and there were spaces that were marked for public performances. So public performances also used to happen at these bazaars, and public performances in the sense that there used to be dances, there used to be musicians performing, dancers, musicians, and singers performing. So he has, in a detailed way, explained in the entire life of the bazaars. Okay. Now, while Ibn Battuta was not particularly concerned with explaining the prosperity of the towns, because he just mentioned these two, that is Delhi and Daulatabad, but you have to understand that a significant portion of it, he has written that a significant portion of the wealth that was in these cities came from the villages. Okay, that is, the surplus from the villages came to the cities. Okay, now Ibn Battuta found that Indian agriculture, let's discuss about the Indian agriculture a little bit. He has written extensively on the Indian agriculture. He said that the Indian soil is perfect for its agriculture to such an extent that in India there are two crops grown in a year. So what he is referring to here is Kharif and Rabi, right? So he says Indian soil is known for its productivity. Why productivity? Because of the soil, which is extremely fertile in nature. Now, this allows the farmers to cultivate two crops in a year, like I told you, Kharif and Rabi. Okay. Now, he also noted that the subcontinent was well integrated. So, let's understand that how was the subcontinent well integrated? It was well integrated in the sense that there used to be a great network laid out for what? For trade and commerce. Indian manufacturers were, huge, were in huge demand when it especially came to textiles, when it came when it came to textiles such as cotton, especially muslin, then spices, especially pepper, right? So these were exported to different countries, and especially to West Asia and to Southeast Asia. This used to fetch huge profits for the artisans and the merchants back in India, right? So some of the examples are cotton, silk also is extremely important. Silk, then cotton, then muslin. Muslin used to be, for instance, Dhaka in Bengal was extremely famous for its muslin. It was said that it is so soft, then one doesn't even realize that one is actually wearing it. Muslin is actually a very pure form of cotton. So fabric is actually cotton only, and it was extremely famous pertaining to the place Dhaka in Bengal, right? Then satin also was very famous. Then brocade. These are the names of the fabrics. You must remember them. He has written about all of these. Now, Ibn Battuta says that there was a huge demand of all of these things. This we understand because he has also given an example behind it. And what is that example? He said that the fine muslin, this cloth that I told you about, this was so expensive that it was only and only muslin was only and only worn by the nobles and the extremely rich. So this was not a cloth for the ordinary. Do you understand? So this is the important bit, how he explains different, spheres of life. He has explained agriculture, he has explained trade and commerce, he has explained to us the city life, he has explained to us the atmosphere of the bazaars, the markets, how they were, not a place for just economic activity, but social and cultural activities as well. How do we understand social and cultural activities? That we understood that this place was also used as a medium for public performances where dancers, musicians, singers, all of these basically performed. Now, this is all that you need to know about Ibn Battuta, especially in terms of the trade, in terms of agriculture, in terms of social and cultural life. Now, there is one extremely important bit that he discusses pertaining to India, which is the unique system of communication. This is very important. You see, Ibn Battuta said that, you see, we just discussed that a huge amount of demand was for Indian products in the West Asia and in the Southeast Asian countries, right? Now, if there was this huge demand, you simply understand that there must have been an entire network, this entire network set, right? So all the trade routes were basically well supplied with inns as in rest houses where the merchants, where the traders could rest, when they're crossing places from one place to another, when they're taking along the stuff with them to sell in different countries. All of this is very important. So he specifies that there was inns, there were rest houses well laid in the path of the trade, right? Then he also says that the merchants could send information and could also dispatch goods required at an at urgency, that is if they were required immediately. So all of these things were basically available. You see, today you order something on Amazon and Flipkart, it reaches you the next day or in 2 days or whatever. But here you're talking about the 14th century, so this is extremely important to understand the time period that we're talking about. So the network was this well laid that all the information and all the goods that were required at a short notice were actually delivered. And also, uh, these merchants had the use these merchants had this network laid out for them, as a result of which you simply understand that the trade was actually flourishing. Okay, the trade was actually flourishing. Now, the example that he gives of the portal system is that it was so efficient that if you had to cross, let's say, from Delhi to Sindh, it took 50 days. Okay, but with this network laid out, the a good, for instance, or a message could be delivered from Delhi to Sindh within what? Within just 5 days. So this is an extremely important example which is telling us about how well laid out the network was. And let's read about what exactly is this network. So you see this picture on the screens right now. This is telling us about this network. Let's look into it. So this is how Ibn Battuta describes the portal system. In India, the portal system is of two kinds. The horse post, which is called Uluk, which is run by royal horses stationed at a distance of every 4 miles. The foot post is the second one, has 3 stations per mile. It is called Dawa. So what are the two kinds? The one is the horse and on the foot. The horse one is called Uluk and the other one is called Dawa. That is 1/3 of a mile. Now, at every third of a mile, there is a well populated village outside which there are 3 pavilions in which sit men with girded lines ready to start. Each of them carries a rod 2 cubits in length with a copper bells at the top. When the courier starts from the city, he holds the letter in one hand and the rod with its bell on the other. When he runs as fast as he can. When the men in the pavilion hear the ringing of the bell, they get ready. As soon as the courier reaches them, one of them takes the letter in his hand and at the top, shaking the rod with all the while until he reaches the next dawa. Right? Dawa is what? Dawa is basically the station per mile. Then the same process continues till the letter reaches the destination. This foot post is quicker than the horse post, and often it is used to transport the fruits from Khorasan, which is much desired in India. Now, what is this place, Khorasan? Khorasan is basically today what you understand as Central Asia. So, Khorasan is a region. We're talking about Uzbekistan, we're talking about Kazakhstan, then we're talking about Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, all of these places, right? So the region is very important. You need to understand this. This is a region in Central Asia. So the fruits of the this region were much desired in India, and this is how they came to India. So this is basically explaining us how well laid this network was, due to which trade and commerce basically flourished. So you have to remember that amongst these two, Ibn Battuta describes that dawa, which is the foot soldiers, was the quicker way of delivering the goods, right? So this is what he has to explain about the unique system of communication. Now the last bit that we're going to discuss is his views on women, slaves, and the others. You see, Ibn Battuta, like I told you, he was intrigued by the new cultures, the new ways of life, all of those things. So we have looked into well, how with such intricacy has he's described as the towns, the markets, how they were like, and everything. Now, what does he have to say about women, slaves, and others? Let's look into it. Before we read this picture, I want to discuss some common things with you pertaining to how slaves and how women were basically treated back then, so you have a bit of an insight into it. So travelers who have written accounts have explained that this is a time period when women and slaves could be actually bought. Now they were bought basically so that they become what? They become the commodities of the of the owner, right? For instance, slaves were openly sold in the markets. They were basically openly sold in the markets like ordinary goods. Is this clear? Please do remember this. This is quite important. So when Ibn Battuta reached Sindh, he purchased horses, he purchased camels, and he purchased slaves. All of these were purchased by him because he wanted to present this as a gift to who? A gift to the Sultan of India, that is Muhammad bin Tughlaq. And when he reached India, he presented these gifts to Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and Tughlaq was so impressed in return that he appointed him as, like we understood, a Qazi, and he also in return gave him, coins. And how many coins are we talking about? We're talking about 100,000 tankas. Now, tankas were what? Tankas were basically coins, right? Along with this, he was presented 200 slaves. So you can simply understand that this was the position of the women and the slaves back then. So what does Ibn Battuta now write about women? He says it is the habit of the emperor to keep with every noble, great or small, one of his slaves who spies on the noble. So you simply understand that women slaves were basically used as spies. Okay, they were basically used as spies. See, nobles are who? Nobles are basically under the ruler. So the sultan had to know what these nobles are thinking. Are they plotting against him? Are they working accordingly, according to his wishes and desires? So for all of these, they were kept under a check, and they were kept under a check by using the spies, which were women slaves. Okay. He also appointed female scavengers who enter the houses unannounced, and then the girls would communicate all the information they possess. So these spies would communicate all the information that they have gathered about the concerned nobles, where they were, basically appointed. They would give all of this information to who? To the female scavengers. So you see, these were the works assigned to them. This is how who the sultan would basically, you know, get to know about what was working around in his kingdom, how the nobles were behaving, were they, were they being subservient to him or not. So this is how the women slaves were basically used. Now female slaves were captured in raids and expeditions. So during the times of wars, during the time of aggressions, boundary aggressions, all of those things, the women had to face the brunt of it. They became slaves and were captured, like it's written here, in raids and expeditions, right? Now, from Ibn Battuta's accounts, what do we understand about all of this is that female slaves were in service of Sultan. The Sultan used to make them do work, and they used to, for instance, dance for him, entertain him, all of those things. And female slaves were also employed by Sultan, like we understood here, as spies, just to keep a check on the nobles. Now, don't do not think that these slaves were something which were just, the servants, so to say, of the masters. The situation was such that the slaves were generally used for domestic purpose. They were used for domestic purpose. You see, if they're being sold in the markets like random goods, then they would be purchased by not just the ruler or the sultan, but by ordinary people as well. So Ibn Battuta has found that their services were rather cheap, okay, or they services were rather cheap in the sense that they did not, they weren't provided much. They worked at very reasonable conditions. They didn't ask much. They used to do household works, so they were engaged in household chores. And it was, that common a practice, for instance, that he says most families could afford at least one or two such slaves. And especially for domestic cause, women slaves bought by the were bought by the people concerned. From where? From the markets, where they were, like I told you, openly sold. So this is all the things that we had to discuss under Ibn Battuta. These are rather important points. We've discussed from all the possible angles. We've looked into the, how he understood trade, how he understood the important cities, the important towns. All of this is done. So I hope this was informative. Thank you for watching.